Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast. I'm Dr. Kevin Lenderman out of Southern Louisiana, and I'm joined by Dr. Rob DeMartino out of Vegas. And listen, if your mitochondria could pick a doctor, this is the guy that they would pick. Dr. Rob DeMartino. What's up, Doc?
Hey, not so much, man. How's it going?
I'm doing well. I tell you what, I have had some complicated cases this week, man. My brain has been running circles this week, but it's been a great week, man. Great week.
Yeah, they're getting more and more complicated, it seems, but thankfully, the science is around to explain a lot of these things now.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to tackle this subject that we're going to talk about today. And I know before we went on the show, we kind of debated like, should we discuss this or not? And I'm glad that we decided to because when I actually think about it, we're talking about frequency medicine today and different frequencies in the body and how all that works. And when we think about frequencies, the medical field uses frequencies all the time. They've got bone stimulators, EKGs, EEGs, MRIs. They break up kidney stones with frequency. And then all of a sudden we start talking about frequency and it's like woo woo, witch doctor crazy talk. And it's really not. Frequencies are a real thing.
Yeah, and they've been around for a very, very long period of time, and there was this systematic plan for them to try to remove the ability of using frequency in the form of medicine in the way that we do it because it was incredibly powerful for healing. But it started to go against this idea of the chemistry model, the pharmaceutical model, the better health through better chemistry model that they've introduced and had such control over for such a long period of time because frequency medicine would oppose that and frankly make it obsolete. So yeah, that was why they kind of went after it. So it's been around for a long time. It's tried, well, true, trusted. There's a lot of research and documentation behind it. And nowadays it's even funny because we use frequency more now than we ever have before. Right? Someone told me the other day, well, I don't believe in frequency. I was like, well, then get rid of your cell phone.
Yeah.
Right? How do you think that thing works, right? You think it just magically makes phone calls, right? No, it just does it through frequency. It's not the ways that we're thinking about it, but it's just kind
Right.
of the way that it works. So yeah, it's just an interesting thing that nowadays it's so much more prevalent, but we just don't think of it in that perspective.
Just through a little bit more of that history. Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different angles around this. So back in the 1920s, there was a gentleman named Royal Rife, and Royal Rife's kind of a claim to fame was what his original job was. He was the guy who built the first electron microscope. And what he was doing was he was experimenting with ideas of using frequencies to kill bacteria or infectious agents that his theory was that infectious agents that got inside of cells cause disease, right? So he was experimenting. Now, everyone said, well, they couldn't reproduce all the results that he was getting because he started to get these really fantastic results by using frequencies to kill infections or repair cells, depending upon what frequencies he was using. But he was doing it by trial and error. But everyone said, well, we can't reproduce the results. Well, the problem with that was the reason they couldn't reproduce the results was he was the guy who created the electron microscopes that we use today. So he could see on a level that nobody else could see, but everybody else is still using the old school microscopes at this time, so they can't see any of that. So we can't recreate it. But the reason why was because had this advanced technology that he had created. So he was working with a lot of different medical institutions and things like that. And his mistake, if you will, was he started to do research around cancer. Right. And frequency medicine for cancer is kind of persona non grata, but it's public record. In the 30s, the AMA came in and said, we want the technology. He said no. So they raided him and they bought out the medical institution that did the research for him for a few $100,000. Now you're talking about in the 1930s, which is the height of the Great Depression, which would be, hundreds of millions today. And they bought that out and then all of that research disappeared. So he became an alcoholic. They've destroyed his life's work. And it didn't really resurface until the 1980s when somebody wrote a book about his life. And then there was other ideologies around frequencies as well too. But a lot of that, how it created, kind of died with those other doctors who were doing this in the early 1900s. But now we're kind of spoiled in the sense that we have all of this data that they got for us, and we can objectify the fact that it works. Right? Like we have certain frequency patterns that we use all the time that are incredible for lowering inflammatory reactions. And it is documented that it does it. right? And it doesn't do it by just, suppressing it by taking a pill. It fixes the problem that's driving the body to make that inflammatory reaction. And that is hardcore research. When my friend who introduced me to this at first showed me that research, he sent me one patient and said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "That's not possible. To get that level of that inflammation down and that speed is not possible." And then he sent me six more where he did it again. And he says, "What do you think now?" And I said, "I think you need to tell me where you got that machine before they disappear it." So I could get
Right.
myself one. And that was 20 years ago, and here we are. So technology just keeps advancing the ideas of what we know about frequencies, how we can give frequencies to the body. And your body uses frequencies. Like this isn't something that we're doing that's abnormal. This is how your body does it normally. We're just using that to help it signal just outside of a chemical model.
Yeah, sometimes patients still ask me about Rife. They're like, "Is this like a Rife machine?" And I'm like, "Yeah, plus about 70 years of technology." So
Mhm.
it is similar theory. However, we now can. It's like the difference between an old Motorola and an iPhone. Like we have advanced to the point where we now know much more. Rather than just one frequency, we now have lots of different ways we can tune that, like tuning a radio station to achieve different things. And so, Doc, let's back up a little bit and talk about the frequency of the body, like the cell frequencies and the body's frequencies, and then we could talk about matching some of those frequencies next. But each cell generates frequency, and every organ has a resonant frequency. So start with that a little bit.
So we play with this idea that we're just basically like a pool table where you're just bouncing billiard balls off of each other, right? And that's the idea of chemistry, right? Like one thing happens and it bounces to this ball, and then that ball bounces and hits that ball, and this ball bounces, hit that. And there is some of that goes on, but think about the speed of which the way the body does things. Right. There was this video floating around on Facebook for a while, and it showed this molecule like slowly walking down,
Uh-huh.
and it's
I
carrying
saw that.
this element, right? You've seen that one? And it's going down. It says, that's an endorphin molecule. That's the element of happiness, right? Well, how long does it take you to get happy? Right? Like I tell a hilarious joke, you start laughing right away, right? Like it's not like,
Hmm.
oh, an hour later, once that molecule walks really slowly down the thing and that happiness molecule gets there, you start laughing, right? If I jumped up behind you and scared you, the reaction is instantaneous. It doesn't have time to billiard ball bounce everything around. So the cells are flashing signals in light and frequency, and it's telling the body what has to happen, what needs to happen, what's going to happen. It's constantly signaling with itself, just the same way your cell phone is constantly checking for updates, right? Did you get an email? Did you get a Facebook notification? Did you get a text message, right? Is there a phone call coming in? Your body's constantly sending signals that way. It's just doing it through the ideology of frequency. So now we know, and we have known for decades, that certain parts of the body will resonate with certain types of frequencies, right? So there is a certain frequency for your heart. There is a certain frequency for your liver. There is a certain frequency for your kidneys, right? There are certain frequencies for pretty much almost every single solitary part of the body. And like you said, you used the analogy before of a radio station. I think it's a great analogy, right? If I want to listen to the country music station, I got to go to 99.9, right? Now, if I go to 99.6, you can still hear the music. It's just fuzzy because it's out of tune, right? So your body has these resonant frequencies that we want them to work at, and we can identify. We have identified. I mean, numerous. I mean, this is a very complicated science, right? And so don't blow our offices up and say, "Hey, what frequency do I use?" I get that all the time. Like, "Hey, what frequency do I use?" There is not like one frequency that does it all, right? This is like a cooking recipe. You have to use the right frequencies for the right person at the right place at the right time. You have to combine them in ways that are smart to make this work. But if you know how to do that, we can start influencing the body to signal in the ways that we want it to, in the correct ways, which it's just lost the ability to do that.
Yeah, it reminds me of course, I'm dating myself here, but back when we actually dialed the radio, it would be staticky, staticky, and then all of a sudden that stereo light would pop on. Like you had it right where you needed it. And a lot of times disease is caused from you're just a little off of that stereo button. You're just a little bit off of frequency. And there's a lot of things which we're going to get into today that are causing those frequencies to be off. But, Doc, would it be fair to say that disease at its most fundamental level is a frequency disruption?
Typically. Typically. I
Yeah.
mean, even if we try to go back to this idea of chemistry, what do chemicals do? Well, they help us interpret frequency, right? So, you take a molecule of iodine and pretty much any chemical in your body, but we'll use iodine as an example. It has a specific absorption spectrum of frequencies and an emission spectrum of frequencies. So, what that means in real people terms is it will take in frequencies at a certain level and then convert them into a frequency in a different level that the body needs. So they just become harmonic influencers. That's what they're doing. That's why we need them in there. They need to be able to help us interpret the frequency that we get, typically from the environment or another part of the body, and then say, okay, cool, I got the message. I'll go tell the other guy, and he acts as a middleman, and then goes tell, hey, this is what we need to do. That's how the body's working. That's how the body's signaling all of these things. So even chemicals in the system are still working through frequencies. That's why a lot of the times, we've talked about this a million times on the podcast, right? People can have good looking blood work. They have all the chemicals that they need. But if they're bouncing the wrong frequencies, then, the game of telephone, by the time you get to the end of the line, the message is completely wrong from where it started.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen videos of these old functional guys, back from the 50s and 60s going, we are vibration, we are energy, we are frequency. And now the science has caught up to all of that, and they were right. I mean, that really is the fundamental idea of what we are. If I died, and this is one of the favorite things I've ever heard you say, Doc, if I died right now and drew my blood and sent it to the lab, it would look great. So I don't have any energy frequency in my body, but the chemistry looks great. And so much is made in America about what does my blood work show? What is my blood work doing? And the whole time they're focused on that, their frequency is a disaster.
Yeah, and I think what's a really important portion of this is twofold things. Before, we talk a lot about mitochondria, right? Mitochondria is kind of the core, especially for the type of chronic illnesses that we deal with. And mitochondria are heavily based in frequency, right? So we just typically talk about them as engines and the powerhouse of the cell, and they do that as well too. But they are antennas to our environment. They're what controlling the signaling of what signals are going out and what signals are coming in. So they have a tremendous amount to do, and their response to frequency is absolutely beautiful. It's what they are programmed to do, right? It's almost like a car engine, right? Yeah, there's an engine and there's a structural component to it, but if I don't turn that key or hit that gas pedal, you don't go, right? You could have the engine and it could be perfectly fine, but it needs signals in order to be able to know, okay, I have to turn on, I have to go, and your body will get that in that form. So part of the problem that we run into is with mitochondria. And I had this argument with the doctor on I think this was Instagram. I can never remember, all the social media platforms get together, but I was thinking it was Instagram. We were arguing, and he's like, "Well, how do you know what that?" Look, there is no mitochondrial specialist, right? I think that's where doctors get confused, right? Because people ask me all the time, well, what doctor do I go see for mitochondria? Look, there's no, cardiology for heart and pulmonologist for lungs and nephrologist for kidneys. If there was a mitochondrial specialist, believe me, we would be it, right? Like I would have had those letters after my name a long, long time ago, because I don't think there's a course on mitochondria that I haven't taken or passed that information along to you guys. But so people will look at that and say, well, there is no specialist. Yeah, no, but doesn't mean that it's not important. And then so many of these things that remain unexplainable. Well, we don't know what causes that. I do this with patients all the time. Like, doc, how do you know all this stuff? It's not that I know it. I just know something different, because it's not explainable through chemistry. It's not explainable through biochemistry, but it's easily explainable through biophysics. When I sit with people and say, well, they don't know what causes autoimmune. No, they don't know what causes autoimmune in a chemical model, because it's not caused by that. Biophysics knows exactly what causes autoimmune disease. We've known it for a long time. But that's where there's this mystery of yes, I don't know what that means, okay, we can't explain it, but we can't explain it from this biochemical pharmaceutical focus. We can explain it very easily from a biophysical focus. We see that all the time. But between no specialty, between frequency being basically persona non grata when it comes down to medical stuff, because the FDA's opinion on frequency is we don't have an opinion, but they have a very strong opinion if you use it for cancer, right? They have a very strong
Right.
opinion on that.
Yeah.
But
Here
their
comes the
kind of opinion
target.
is, yeah, yeah, the bullseye gets a lot more big, right? But they don't have a real big frequency on it. But again, they use it in so many dimensions. But it's just not where, because we live in this biochemical model, things aren't explainable until you start really understanding the biophysics.
Yeah. And so also the earth has a lot of frequency things that are very interesting about it. Like the Schumann resonance. So let's talk about the Schumann resonance because that's fascinating.
Yeah, so Schumann resonance really powerful. So back in the 1850s, a guy named Winfried Schumann, right, that's why we call it the Schumann resonance, discovered that there was this resonant field, this frequency that existed in the Earth's atmosphere. And there's somewhere between about 10 million lightning strikes to the surface of the Earth a day. So you got the Earth that's spinning, you've got its iron, liquid core that's spinning around. And so we would create this frequency field that we ended up calling the Schumann resonance, and our brain waves connect to that, right? So it sits right in the middle of our alpha waves. So when you do like a test, like you mentioned earlier, like an EEG, which is measuring your brainwave activity, we're looking at how our brainwaves connect to that resonant cavity of the earth. And they've done studies on this where they put people into places where the Schumann resonance is blocked. And these are healthy people. And in a short period of time, they start getting depression, they start getting headaches, they start getting fatigue. And then they'll bring a Schumann resonant generator in there that actually makes that frequency, and they feel better in no time. So we're meant to be exposed to all of these things in these planetary frequencies. Obviously, the Earth makes a really strong magnetic field as it spins. And there's a tremendous amount of data now around all of this that is wildly changing, and wildly changing in a very negative way, which is going to push frequency medicine more to the forefront because we're going to be more dependent upon that. Because as we lose the frequencies of nature, as we lose the magnetic field, right, as the Schumann resonance gets more thrown off its balance, as we tell people to stay out of sunlight because sunlight comes down in wavelengths, but it's still frequency, right? It's just a different way of talking about it. As we move away from frequencies, we just end up out of harmony, right? And that's where you get frequency and harmonics, right? The harmonic frequencies of music and sound. That's where our bodies get out of balance. Can you see that manifest itself as chemistry? Yeah, but that's just the intermediary portion of what those signals need to be. A body that cannot signal does not work correctly.
Yeah, so the Schumann resonance is what 7.83 hertz is
Mhm.
supposed to
Yep.
be, which matches almost exactly the frequency of the brain, correct?
Yeah, your alpha waves, right? So alpha
Yeah,
waves
your
mean you're
alpha waves.
awake, you're aware, but you're calm. And that's kind of where you want to be.
So what we think is way back in the evolutionary days, so our brain sort of matched that frequency that it was around when it's at its best, which is the alpha waves. And so Doc and I have a really funny saying in our offices, one of those days when everybody's just acting really crazy for no reason, like everybody's bad, everything's going wrong. And you look at the Schumann's frequency that day and it's way off. And so, that was always kind of blamed on a full moon, like, oh, it must be a full moon. It's really the Schumann resonance. And when you see something really crazy happen in society, it's really uncanny how often the Schumann resonance is going crazy that day.
Yeah, I always tell people, right? You've heard me say it a million times, like, hey, if everyone doesn't feel well, like look at that and just see if the planetary alignments. It sounds again woo woo when you talk about planetary alignments. But I remember my grandmother telling me, oh, it's a full moon. The drivers are going to be
Yeah.
crazy. The traffic's going to be bad. But it's very real. It's actually where the term lunatic comes from, right? Lunar means lunar, like sun, like moon rather. So lunatic, right? So they're changing in the moon will actually change the way. Remember, we are guests here, right? We were like we're dominant, like this is our work. No, no, no. We are guests here. What the Earth does, we kind of go off of that. We don't dictate anything. It dictates what we do. And again,
Yeah.
seeing these big changes in the Earth's magnetic field starts to cause these really unbelievable changes to our body, the way our blood flows, the way our mitochondria works. We are meant to be connected to all of these natural frequencies, and nowadays we're replacing all of these natural frequencies with all of these unnatural frequencies, right? Instead of getting exposed to natural frequencies of sunlight, we're under indoor lighting, which is completely alien frequencies of light that our bodies are exposed to. Instead of getting exposed to the Schumann resonance, we're exposed to that 5G tower that's right outside of our bedroom window, and the Wi-Fi that's sitting right next to us, right? So we are
Right.
constantly exposed to all of these alien type signals, and then we end up completely off frequency because your body's almost like Wi-Fi. Like if you have your cell phone and you go away, like your body, the phone's always looking for the Wi-Fi to connect to, right? If you have your Wi-Fi on, it's like, hey, where's a router that I can connect to? Your body does the same thing. It's looking for that naturally. If what it get exposed to is something alien or man-made, it will connect to that and it will harm your health.
Yeah, and the cool thing, the cool story you told me about NASA using this, they figured out when the astronauts separate themselves from the resonance of the Earth, they get sick very quickly, and then they put PEMF generators in the space shuttle or in the spaceships, and they don't have that anymore.
Yeah, they started to notice that, and this started big time. The Russians were actually way ahead of us in this, but they didn't share that information because this was like the middle of the Cold War time. But they started noticing that these people would get really sick, right? They would lose a ton of muscle mass, they would lose bone mass. These are 30-something-year-old people typically in tip-top shape. And when you send them to space, it's almost like the perfect experiment, right? Because you have them, they can't cheat on their diet, right? Their diets are perfect. They make their meals for them. They can't run to like, Dairy Queen and get a ice cream or something like that. They can only eat what they have. They have to exercise a certain amount of time a day. They're checking all their biometrics, and they'll come back and they'll be completely osteoporotic because they're just being away from the Earth's magnetic field and the frequencies that the Earth will provide. You saw this more recently when that Artemis mission went to space to check out the backside of the moon, which I guess that's what they were doing. I have a feeling that they were checking out all this magnetic field data that just came out, that the magnetic field of the Earth is shifting and weakening. But when they came back, one of the astronauts, she lost her ability to speak. And what happens is when you get away from the Earth's magnetic field, the fluid that typically flows around your brain doesn't flow that way. And then basically it becomes like concrete and it locks up Broca's area, which is the part of your brain where you can speak. And the term that we use for it in science is called lattice locked. She gets lattice locked and she loses the ability to speak. And then as she comes back into the field over the course of a bit of time, all of a sudden she gets the ability to speak back. But being away from those fields is what causes them. And again, this is they know this in science now. This again first happened, I think, in the 1970s. Again, it was a Russian astronaut. He sent a distress signal, said, "Hey, I think I'm having a stroke. I can't talk." He's typing.
Yeah.
Just can't talk. They brought him back. They found out that this was the issue. So we see this now, but now we have a lot of people who are basically like living in space, except they're living on the surface of the Earth. They're astronauts on the surface.
Yeah, yeah. This is not the caveman version of Earth we're living on for sure. Doc, I want to play a game. I want to play rapid fire with you.
Ooh,
I'm gonna throw
this is a
some
change.
some frequency medicine concepts at you, and I want you to give us a little paragraph on them. I pulled, and these are all verified, 100% scientific facts. Okay,
Mhm.
so your cells produce light.
100%. Fritz Alfred Popp was the first guy who discovered that. So Fritz Alfred Popp discovered that using what they call a photo multiplier, they could tell that your cells would signal by bursting out light. So think like the guys at the airport who are doing these jobs, right? Your cells are signaling out light to tell the body what to do. Absolutely. We don't have the technology to measure that yet. That is where things will go next. And when we do that, it will open up a whole other world of healing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When when people say like his light went out, it literally is your body, your cells communicate with light. It reminds me of old World War II ships that would flash the lights back and forth to talk to each other. That
Exactly
is
what it is.
actually the way it works,
Actually,
right?
the way it works.
Okay,
Yep.
number two, your DNA is a transmitter and receiver.
Yep. So it acts, that's why it has that structure. That's why it has that helical structure. That is why it spins the way that it does. And again, we typically talk about it as just a structural piece. Same thing as mitochondria have DNA as well too, but they are acting as antennas. They are getting signals in. They are getting signals in the form of magnetism. They are getting signals in the form of light. That is how they know the environment they are in and what they need to do. Your mitochondria have to know when to turn on. That's dictated by frequency and light. You have to know when to turn off. That's dictated by frequency and light. Nuclear genetics is very much the same. What's going to happen next is they're going to find out, and we know this is true, but they're going to be able to measure this, that the body sends what they call UPEs, ultra weak photon emissions. And that's how it signals to itself and signals to each other. We've talked about leptin quite a bit of time on the show, and leptin has a light absorption spectrum of 220 nanometers. Well, guess what? 220 nanometers does not reach the surface of the earth from the sun. So the only way that we can charge leptin in our body to work is when we get certain frequencies of sunlight, our body then converts that sunlight and converts it to 220 nanometers as radiation inside of our body to make leptin work. So we know this. This is scientific fact. We just can't show it on a clinical basis on the day-to-day basis yet because the technology is not there.
Hope right now our audience is going, there is so much more to the human body than this chemical mechanical model that the American medical system has been stuck in for the last 100 years, because there's a lot more to the story, and there's a lot that we still don't even know. Okay, number three, your heart's electromagnetic field extends several feet outside your body.
Yes, correct. So there's a machine that they call it a Meg machine, and the Meg machine can check the electromagnetic fields that come off of the body. And we always thought that when they first discovered this, that it would come off your head, right? Because that's where we have consciousness is coming from our brain. But it is not. The field emanates off the heart. And when somebody is healthy, that field can emanate quite far. And we see that field diminish and shrink as they get sicker and unhealthier. And again, like you said, their lights going out, their battery is going out. But again, this is verifiable. We can measure this. We can't send you the LabCorp to test it yet, but these are things that we absolutely know.
That's just fascinating. So cancer cells have a measurably different frequency than healthy cells. Of course they do.
Correct.
Right, of
Of course,
course.
because we're
Yeah.
talking about voltage, right? So you're talking about electrical voltage of cellular structure. So cancer cells will lose their voltage. And as we lose voltage, and we gain voltage from magnetism, right? So the magnetic field of the earth is what allows, and combined with sunlight, allows our body to keep the cell's voltage high. When the cell's voltage is high, our cells use oxygen very efficiently. So part of what happens in a cancer cell is when a cancer cell loses its voltage, it will not be able to use oxygen even in the presence of oxygen. So it's not a matter of you can't breathe enough oxygen. It's not just as simple as we'll give people oxygen and they'll get better. They can't use oxygen because they've lost the magnetism, which loses the voltage, which does not allow them to use the oxygen in their cells. And then their cells ferment sugar. So when they do a PET scan, what do they see? Oh, those cells gobble up sugar very quickly, but they gobble up that sugar because they lost the magnetism and they lost the voltage, which changes the oxygen tensions. That's the physics
Yeah.
behind how it works.
Yeah. So when you hear people say, well, sugar feeds cancer, that's what they mean. It's because of
Mhm.
this Warburg shift that he's talking about, because the cancer is using that sugar for fuel because it can't use oxygen for fuel. So
And
that's,
we can't use
when they
oxygen
when they
because of
do that.
magnetic drops. Yeah,
Right. Right. Exactly. Your cells make decisions based on frequency, not chemistry.
correct. Yeah, so signaling always will come through frequency, right? It does not come through
Right.
chemistry ever, right? Chemistry does not create signals. Any chemical needs a catalyst to make its action happen, and that catalyst is almost always in the form of frequency.
Yeah. Yeah. Super fascinating. Okay. The last one, water changes its molecular structure in response to frequency. We've looked at some cool stuff in the past on this.
Yeah, water is a phenomenal thing. It's just a basis thing of
We,
human existence. Yet we're still learning new things about water every day.
we should do a whole podcast on water one day.
We probably
Like,
should, yeah,
yeah.
because
Because
the level of water that the amount of things that water does inside of our body. I'm not just talking about the water that we drink, but obviously that a little known fact that the human body makes water. So when we get the proper signals and frequency to our mitochondria, it stimulates the body's ability to produce this what they call fourth phase of water. It exists somewhere between a solid and a liquid. It's kind of like this crystalline gel formation, and it allows us to store energy. So we make ATP, and ATP allows our proteins to open up so that we can stick this water on them so we can put a battery pack and a jet pack of fuel onto these proteins so they can express all of their functions. That is not chemistry. That is physics. That is changing of structure. That does not happen in a chemical model. That happens in a physics relationships model. And I don't know if you saw this, and I just posted it on Facebook the other day in our doctor group. But on the 7th of August, which was just a handful of days ago, the Earth's magnetic core started spinning the complete opposite way. So
yeah,
the
I saw that.
magnetic core spins a certain way. It completely started spinning in the opposite way, and scientists have no idea why. But I'm telling you, this magnetic field is changing. Depending upon where you live, it can have a huge effect on your health if all of a sudden you're living in a place with a weakened magnetic field. I have a patient, I took care of her. She had multiple autoimmunes. Thank God she got better. Her and her husband were always coming in. He said, we're going to move. We're going to move to Puerto Rico. It's like, that's great. They moved to Puerto Rico. Her husband's health falls apart. Can't figure out what's happening, everything. But then all of a sudden, all this magnetic data comes out that the magnetic field is dropping, and Puerto Rico is sitting right in one of the middle places where there's this huge South Atlantic anomaly where we're dropping the magnetic field. Reached out to her, was like, hey, I think this is what's happening. Sent some different frequencies to build his magnetics, and he was right back on the right track again. So it's a fascinating thing of, our environment does play. Hospitals know this, right? Hospitals know this because in certain areas, they know they're going to have certain problems depending upon their zip code. Your zip code and the environment that you live in matters a lot more than people give it credit for.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was so fascinating, and there's so much more to this subject. We could go deeper and deeper, deeper into this, and I think maybe we should talk about water next week. Let's do that, Doc. We could talk for 30 minutes about all the details about
Uh,
water, because here's the thing. You see people, so we've lost our minds a little bit on carrying the water around with us. Like, people didn't used to carry water unless they were crossing the desert or something. And now,
mhm.
you see these ladies at the mall with a 78-ounce water bottle with a shoulder strap on it, and they're all dehydrated. Every time we check them, they're still dehydrated.
Still
So
dehydrated.
next week on the show, we'll talk about why that is, and why no matter how much water you drink, you still feel dehydrated. How's that sound, Doc?
That sounds like a good plan to me. We could fill it. These half hours go fast. I got to tell you that.
They do. They definitely do. They go fast. They go fast. Well, listen, thank you guys so much for joining us. If you want more information on this, you can check out our website at the top, or share this with somebody who's interested in frequency based medicine. Thank you for joining us, Doc. We'll see you next week.